You could hear the shift in the room before anything was said. The energy changed. No one could quite explain it until it happened. Pam Bondi started with a statement. Measured, rehearsed, confident. But just 2 minutes in, she made a move that would flip the room upside down. She turned to Trump directly and tried to defend what many believed was indefensible. It was bold, but maybe too bold, because Trump wasn't having it. He leaned forward, barely blinking. And then he said just one sentence, sharp, cold, and without raising his voice. The words hit harder than any shout could. Pam Bondi stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes twitched for a moment, only a moment, but long enough for everyone to notice. You could feel it in the air. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the aides holding their phones for live transcriptions paused, waiting. She tried to recover. She smiled half-heartedly, pretending it was all fine. But it wasn't. Trump didn't laugh. He didn't even smirk. He just leaned back. And from that moment on, everything changed. It wasn't just about the politics anymore. It was about control, presence, the kind of power you don't announce but command silently. And in that moment, Pam lost hers. But that wasn't the whole story. Because seated just a few chairs away, someone else was watching. Someone who knew exactly when to speak. And more importantly, how. And what Jasmine Crockett did next would flip the room yet again. But this time, in a direction no one could predict. Before this explodes any further, you're subscribed. You don't want to miss what happens when Jasmine Crockett takes over this room. Okay, let's continue. Jasmine Crockett didn't rush to respond. She didn't raise her voice or slam her hand on the table like so many others might have. No, her power came from patience. Precision. She simply leaned forward, folded her hands, and let the silence stretch. People began turning their heads, not to Trump, not to Pam, but to her. She looked directly at Pam, not with anger, not even judgment, but something far more dangerous in a room like this. Clarity. And then she said it. You expected applause for that, didn't you? The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They slid across the room like a knife wrapped in silk. And Pam knew it. Her smile faltered, ever so slightly. But Jasmine wasn't done. You walked in here with a script, she continued, but you forgot who wrote the last chapter. That's when the reaction began. Not loud, but undeniable. A quiet chorus of glances, murmurs, and that unmistakable shift when people start paying real attention. Trump didn't interrupt. He was watching too. Arms crossed, lips pursed, curious. This wasn't just a verbal exchange anymore. This was a shift in hierarchy. Pam tried to interject, tried to regain footing, but Jasmine, still composed, raised a hand gently. Let me finish, she said, not demanding, just certain. And for reasons no one could quite explain, Pam stopped. Jasmine wasn't grandstanding. She wasn't delivering some fiery speech for the cameras. She was doing something far more disarming. She was making it personal. She spoke about consequences, not abstract ones, real ones, the lives affected, the voices silenced. The people who never got a seat at this table, until now. And every time Pam tried to pivot, Jasmine brought it back. Clean, focused, relentless. Not with aggression, but with something even more effective. Undeniable truth. It was the kind of moment that made even seasoned staffers glance at one another like, are we really witnessing this? Because for the first time in that room, the usual power dynamics cracked. It wasn't about who had the microphone. It was about who owned the moment, and Jasmine Crockett owned it. But what happened next? No one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. Because Trump, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly sat forward. And when he spoke again, the entire direction of the room spun again. Trump leaned in. Slowly. The room tensed. You could practically hear people hold their breath. Not because he was about to explode, but because no one could guess what angle he'd take next. And then, he swiveled. Not toward Jasmine, not toward Pam, but toward the back row. You know who's real quiet right now? He said, voice low, steady. The folks who sat through this whole thing and still don't know what they're clapping for. A wave of confusion rolled through the chamber. Staffers blinked. Aides looked at one another. Who was he pointing at? What did he mean? But Trump didn't clarify. That was the point. He let the words hang, just vague enough to stick, just sharp enough to sting. It was classic Trump. Not an answer, but a redirection. Not a defense, but a disruption. The room had been focused, too focused, on a very specific moment between him, Pam, and Jasmine. and he didn't like being boxed in. So he cracked it open. "I don't need applause," he added. "I've already got receipts." Suddenly, phones buzzed. People started checking. Was he teasing evidence? Footage? Texts? The reporters in the room sharpened, ready to leap on whatever he'd just hinted at. And that was his play. Shift the focus, dangle mystery, let chaos do the rest. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She knew this game. She didn't try to follow his twist or respond with outrage. She did something far more dangerous. She waited. And then, after a pause, she turned, not to Trump, but to the rest of the room. "This," she said slowly, "is the part where we either get distracted or get real." Another shift. Now she wasn't just responding to Trump. She was reclaiming the audience, the room, the staffers, even the camera feeds. She looked out, not up, as if daring the entire room to stop chasing shiny objects and face the actual issue. Trump glanced at her, just briefly. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, but he was paying attention. That was clear, and for once he didn't interrupt, because the moment was slipping, not from his control, but from the illusion of control. And Jasmine knew it, because while Trump was busy throwing smoke and Pam was still reeling from the cold shoulder, Jasmine was building something else entirely: momentum, the kind that didn't come from shouting or spectacle, the kind that couldn't be spun with a single sentence. But that's when the room broke wide open, because someone else decided they couldn't stay silent anymore. From the far right corner of the room, a voice rose, steady, sharp, and unexpected. "Point of clarity," it began. All heads turned. It was Judge Edward Chen. Until now, silent, observing, but not idle. And the moment he spoke, the entire tone of the chamber shifted. Chen wasn't one to interrupt casually, and when he did, it meant one thing: he saw the conversation veering into dangerous territory. Not legally. Politically. "I'd like to remind everyone," Chen said, "that this chamber isn't a stage for shadow games. We deal in statements, not suggestions. If there's something to show, show it. If not, let's not waste our time with illusions." Trump didn't look rattled. He leaned back again, arms folded, the faintest shrug in his posture. Jasmine, on the other hand, smiled. Not wide, not arrogant. Just enough to show she understood what had just happened. Because Judge Chen had done more than intervene. He'd issued a challenge. Pam, still seated, avoided eye contact. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced now with a kind of quiet survival mode. She was no longer the focus, but she wasn't free either. Jasmine turned slightly toward Chen and gave a respectful nod. "Appreciated, Your Honor," she said calmly. "And I think the people outside this room would appreciate some actual clarity too." She glanced at the media pit in the back, cameras still rolling, journalists still scribbling. Then she said it. "Let's stop pretending the silence is strategic. It's not power, it's panic." That line cracked through the room like thunder, because everyone knew who she was talking about. Trump didn't respond. But for a split second, his eyes narrowed. Not in fury, he didn't give her that, but in focus. And that's when it became clear. He wasn't brushing her off, he was recalculating. This wasn't a battle he expected. It wasn't about volume or force, it was about control, of narrative, of pacing, of perception. And Jasmine had disrupted all three. But Chen wasn't finished either. He sat forward slightly, hands clasped. "Then let's proceed with facts," he said. "If anyone here has evidence, testimony, or relevance to contribute, do so. Otherwise, let's allow this chamber to move forward without theater." And that was it. The warning was issued. The theatrics had an expiration date. And everyone in that room, Trump, Pam, Jasmine, the aides, the cameras, they all knew. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a recalibration. One misstep, one misworded phrase, and reputations could shift forever. But what came next? That changed everything. Because just when it seemed things were settling, Pam Bondi did something no one expected. Pam Bondi sat still for a beat too long. The kind of pause that says something's coming but no one knows what. Then she leaned forward, slowly, both hands on the table. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I think we're losing sight of the real issue," she began. "A safe start. Too safe." But then she pushed further. "I didn't come here to be the subject of anyone's performance," she said, cutting a glance toward Jasmine. "I came here to defend what I believe was mischaracterized." And just like that, she was back in it, trying to reframe, rewrite, reclaim some sense of control. But she misread the room, because instead of strength, it sounded like deflection. She went on, referencing old memos, vague records, alleged inconsistencies in Jasmine's timeline. But the problem wasn't her points. It was the energy behind them. It felt like grasping. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't even blink. She waited. Pam's voice got tighter. Her pace quickened. And the longer she spoke, the more it became clear. This wasn't about setting the record straight. It was about survival. Because when people feel the room shifting away from them, they don't calmly step aside. They cling. And Pam was clinging. She wrapped up with a final line, meant to hit hard. Some people come here to seek truth. Others come here to build their brand. There it was. The dagger. Or at least, she thought it was. The line hung in the air, sharp and sour. Jasmine paused. Then, without even changing her tone, she replied, "If you think standing up for people who've been silenced is a brand, then maybe the silence was never accidental." That line? That one hit. Hard. You could feel it, a ripple through the room. Even the press pit froze. Because Jasmine didn't raise her voice, she didn't even change her posture. But she exposed something no one had put into words yet. The battle wasn't about facts. It wasn't even about defense. It was about narrative. Who owns it? Who shapes it? And who walks out clean? Pam sat back, her mouth opened slightly, like she had a rebuttal ready, but she didn't say it. Because whatever it was, it wouldn't land now. The shift was final. She had played her last card, and it didn't stick. Trump didn't flinch. He didn't defend her. He didn't nod. He just stared forward, quiet, calculating. Because he knew what Jasmine had just done. She didn't just win the room, she reframed it. But there was still one more twist to come. Because Jasmine was just getting started. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean in. She simply reached into a slim folder in front of her and pulled out a single document. No fanfare, no grand gesture, just quiet confidence. She held it up, not to wave it around or demand attention, but just enough so those who needed to see it did. And then she said the words that reset the entire tone of the session. "Let's talk about who was really in the room." The silence thickened. She laid the document on the table, carefully, and tapped it once. "This is from a closed-door advisory meeting held 4 months ago," she said. "The one Pam said she never attended. The one where certain decisions were supposedly made above her pay grade." Then she looked up, directly at Bondi. "I'd like to read what your signature is doing at the bottom of this transcript." The air left the room. Pam blinked. She looked down at her papers like they might offer a way out, a response, anything. But there was nothing. No memo, no spin, no defense that would land fast enough. Because the damage wasn't just the document, it was the certainty in Jasmine's delivery. The fact that she didn't need to shout it meant everyone knew it was real. Trump, still silent, tilted his head ever so slightly, just enough to suggest interest, not approval, not disapproval. Just calculation, the kind of expression that says, "I didn't expect that, but I'm taking notes." Jasmine continued, calm as ever. "This isn't about catching people off guard, it's about patterns. Because this room keeps pretending some decisions are accidental, when really, they're habitual." Every word was like a scalpel, precise, intentional. And while Jasmine spoke, something strange happened. People started listening differently. Not reactively, not defensively, but with that quiet stillness that only shows up when the truth is undeniable. Pam didn't speak. Couldn't. Her silence wasn't power anymore, it was exposure. And Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't even look smug. She simply closed the folder, slid it aside, and folded her hands again. As I said earlier, if we're going to talk clarity, let's be clear about what's been hidden in plain sight. Boom. No theatrics, just facts. And suddenly, the session wasn't just a hearing, it was a reckoning. But there was still one more person who hadn't spoken, one person who had sat back, absorbing everything. And when they finally spoke, they didn't side with Pam, or Trump, or Jasmine. They asked one question that stunned the entire room. The voice that followed was unmistakable, firm, unmistakably direct, and impossible to ignore. "Can someone tell me," Judge Judy began, "why we're pretending this is complicated?" Every head turned. She hadn't said a word for the entire session. She'd been invited in as a neutral legal observer, an honorary figurehead, mostly symbolic. But now she was done watching. She sat forward, her hands folded, gaze piercing. And unlike most in the room, she didn't hedge her words. "I've been in courtrooms longer than some of you have been alive," she said. "And when someone dodges a question, when someone shows up with pre-written outrage and leaves their facts at home, do you know what I call that?" She paused. Let the silence thicken. A distraction. It wasn't rhetorical. It was judgment. Pam visibly shifted in her seat. Judge Judy's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. Her clarity was her strength. And when someone brings receipts, actual, verified, time-stamped information, they don't need to shout. They don't need to grandstand. She turned slightly toward Jasmine. They just need to be heard. It was rare to see someone like Crockett, known for her own firebrand approach, nod silently. But she did. Not out of pride, but because she knew the power of being recognized. Accurately. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "Now, here's my question," she said, eyes scanning the room. "If this document," she pointed toward the transcript Jasmine had laid down, "was available to this committee and one of its signatories denied involvement under oath." She turned her gaze squarely on Pam Bondi. "What exactly are we supposed to do with that?" You could hear a pin drop. It was no longer about who had the sharpest soundbite. This was now a matter of credibility, of potential consequences. And Judge Judy had just drawn a clear line in the sand. Pam didn't answer. She stared at the table, blinking hard. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came. Because how do you respond to something that's already been proven? Judge Judy gave no space for backtracking. "I'm not here to litigate emotions. I'm here to watch people tell the truth. And so far, the only person who walked into this room ready to do that didn't come with a script." The message was loud and clear. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just winning the room anymore. She was changing its rules. And those who weren't ready for that shift? They were being left behind in real time. But just as things seemed settled, another name got pulled into the spotlight, and this time, it came from the last person anyone expected. Donald Trump himself. Trump had been too quiet. Ever since Judge Judy's pointed rebuke and Jasmine's unshakable reveal, he hadn't uttered a single word. But now he straightened in his seat, adjusted his cufflinks, and leaned into the mic, slowly. Everyone braced, and then he said it. "Well, if we're digging up names," he said smoothly, "maybe we should start asking why Rosie O'Donnell's been texting half the people on this panel." "Wait, what?" You could practically hear the room gasp. "Rosie O'Donnell?" Even the court reporters' fingers hesitated on the keys. Reporters scrambled. Staffers looked around, unsure whether to laugh, panic, or both. And Trump? He sat back with that familiar expression, somewhere between smug satisfaction and daring someone to call his bluff. No one expected it. Not because Rosie was irrelevant, but because it came completely out of left field. A curveball thrown with perfect timing to distract, redirect, and disorient. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She raised an eyebrow. That was it. Judge Judy narrowed her eyes. And Judge Chen leaned forward just slightly, signaling interest, but not yet intervention. Trump wasn't finished. "I've got no issue with Rosie personally," he continued, voice just slow enough to sound casual, just sharp enough to sound deliberate. "But when private citizens start trying to steer federal conversations through back channels, maybe we ought to talk about influence." There it was, the strategy. Shift attention from the documented facts to something harder to trace, something that sounded scandalous, but couldn't be confirmed, at least not in real time. Pam Bondi glanced up, hope flickering in her eyes like she thought this might save her. But she misread it again. Because Trump wasn't throwing her a lifeline, he was throwing another grenade. And the room knew it. Judge Judy responded first. "If this is an attempt to deflect from a verified signature on a classified document," she said dryly, "it's a poor one." Trump didn't respond. But Judge Chen stepped in. "If Mr. Trump is making an allegation of improper influence, we'll need to address that in a separate inquiry," he said. "Today's focus remains unchanged." Jasmine leaned forward, not to argue, but to anchor the room again. "Let's not lose track," she said calmly. "Rosie O'Donnell didn't sign anything. Pam Bondi did. It was a scalpel, not a hammer. And it worked." The tension that had been pulled away like a spotlight snapped right back onto Bondi. Because Trump's deflection didn't erase the facts. It only highlighted who was trying to run from them. But while the Rosie comment fizzled, something else was building under the surface. Whispers were beginning. Texts were flying. And the media pit, They were already preparing headlines, and one more player was about to step into the storm. Caroline Levitt had been quiet for too long. Sitting along the side bench, her presence had gone mostly unnoticed. She wasn't the focus. She wasn't under fire. And for a while, it looked like she planned to keep it that way. But then she leaned forward, adjusted the mic, and her voice sliced through the room. "With all due respect," she said, her tone crisp, "since when did courtroom observers get to act like prosecutors?" Judge Judy's eyes locked on her in an instant. Caroline didn't blink. "We invited Judge Judy as an honorary guest, to witness, not to cross-examine, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with the amount of power being projected from someone who's not sworn into this hearing." Boom. It was subtle, but dangerous. Caroline wasn't defending Pam. Not exactly. She was challenging the legitimacy of Judge Judy's influence, trying to fracture the room's focus, peel off the weight of Judy's words without directly contradicting her. It was clever, calculated, but also miscalculated. Because Judge Judy didn't get flustered. She got sharper. "I've been silent through half a dozen misstatements, political detours, and at least 3 outright dodges," she said, voice unwavering. "I spoke when the integrity of this room demanded it." Then she leaned forward, barely, but with a precision that felt like a lightning strike. "And if the truth hurts your side more than the other, maybe your issue isn't with me. Maybe it's with the truth." Gasps. Audible. Jasmine glanced over just for a second, but didn't jump in. She knew this didn't need her. Caroline tried to fire back. "What I'm saying is..." But Judge Judy cut in, gently but firmly. "You've said enough. You've made it clear you're not interested in the document. You're not questioning the facts. You're questioning who's allowed to point them out." And that was the nail in the coffin, because the entire room saw it now. Caroline wasn't trying to seek clarity. She was trying to manage optics. But Judy wasn't playing that game. Jasmine finally spoke, but not to defend anyone. "Let's get back to the facts," she said. "One person signed a document and denied it. One person revealed it, and the rest of us have to decide which side we're sitting on." Short, unapologetic, and suddenly everything realigned again. Caroline sat back, her confidence visibly shaken. Because in trying to undercut one of the most respected figures in the room, she accidentally unified the rest of it. Trump stayed quiet, Pam stayed still, and Judge Judy, she folded her hands, leaned back, and didn't say another word. She didn't have to. But then, just as the dust began to settle, Jasmine leaned into the mic one last time. And what she said next ended the entire conversation. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward with fire. Instead, she did something far more unnerving. She waited, just long enough for the weight of everything that had happened to settle into the room. And then, only then, did she speak. "I want it on the record," she said slowly, "that the only person punished in this room today was the one who told the truth." The words hit like a thunderclap, because they weren't dramatic. They weren't angry. They were devastatingly accurate. Everyone knew who she meant. Pam Bondi had come in, armed with talking points, protected by proximity to power, assuming that the room would lean in her favor. But it didn't. Not because of volume, not because of partisanship, but because someone, Jasmine, had come ready with facts, calmly, relentlessly, unshaken. And in doing so, she'd revealed something no one was ready to admit. That the truth, when spoken without fear, exposes everything people try to hide behind. Trump didn't speak. He didn't need to. His expression was neutral, but locked in. Caroline sat rigid, clearly rethinking her last move. Judge Judy offered no applause, no reaction, just a slow, approving nod. Judge Chen glanced toward the stenographer. "Let the record reflect that statement in full," he said. "No objections, no rebuttals, no one moved." Because Jasmine had done something that very few in that chamber had ever managed, she closed the conversation without raising her voice. She didn't win with sound bites. She won with silence. She didn't weaponize her words. She used them like a scalpel, cutting away the noise, the misdirection, the theater. And what was left? A room full of people with nowhere to hide. Pam didn't speak again. She shuffled her papers, eyes low, posture tight. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by something heavier, the weight of being seen. Trump eventually stood. No speech, no statement. Just a glance around the room that said he'd be back, but even he knew the room wasn't his right now. And Jasmine? She stood too, calm, steady, unbothered. Not because she felt victorious, but because she knew that sometimes the loudest victory is the one that doesn't need to be celebrated. As reporters rushed out to break the story, staffers whispered in the corners, and headlines began forming across 1,000 screens. One thing was clear. This wasn't about a single document. It wasn't about one mistake. It was about the moment power met accountability. And blinked. And Jasmine Crockett? She never blinked. If this had you speechless, wait till you see what happened when Jasmine Crockett went head-to-head with Caroline Leavitt. Click here to watch it now. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This story is just getting started. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.